This video is for educational purposes only. It may contain errors or missing details due to AI limitations. We encourage viewers to read the original book for complete accuracy.
Chapter 9. The Librarian. Please, you have to be careful. The woman had arrived seemingly from nowhere, smartly dressed, with short gray hair and a turtle green polo neck jumper. About 60, if Nora had to pin it down. Who are you? But before she had finished the question, she realized she already knew the answer. I'm the librarian, the woman said coyly. That is who. Her face was one of kind but stern wisdom. She had the same neat cropped gray hair she'd always had, with a face that looked precisely as it always did in Nora's mind. For there, right in front of her, was her old-school librarian, Mrs. Elm. Mrs. Elm smiled, thinly. Perhaps. Nora remembered those rainy afternoons playing chess. She remembered the day her father died when Mrs. Elm gently broke the news to her in the library. Her father had died suddenly of a heart attack while on the rugby field of the boys' boarding school where he taught. She was numb for about an hour and had stared blankly at the unfinished game of chess. The reality was simply too big to absorb at first, but then it hit her hard and sideways, taking her off the track she'd known. She had hugged Mrs. Elm so close, crying into her polo neck until her face was raw from the fusion of tears and acrylic. Mrs. Elm had held her, stroking and smoothing the back of her head like a baby, not offering platitudes or false comforts or anything other than concern. She remembered Mrs. Elm's voice telling her at the time, "Things will get better, Nora. It's going to be all right." It was over an hour before Nora's mother came to pick her up, her brothers stoned and numb in the back seat. And Nora had sat in the front next to her mute, trembling mother, saying that she loved her, but hearing nothing back. What is this place? Where am I? Mrs. Elm smiled, a very formal kind of smile. A library, of course. It's not the school library, and there's no exit. Am I dead? Is this the afterlife? Not exactly. I don't understand. Then let me explain. Chapter 10. The Midnight Library. As she spoke, Mrs. Elm's eyes came alive, twinkling like puddles in moonlight. Between life and death, there is a library, she said. And within that library, the shelves go on forever. Every book provides a chance to try another life you could have lived, to see how things would be different if you had made other choices. Would you have done anything different if you had the chance to undo your regrets? So, I am dead? Nora asked. Mrs. Elm shook her head. No. Listen carefully. Between life and death. She gestured vaguely along the aisle, towards the distance. Death is outside. Well, I should go there, because I want to die. Nora began walking. But Mrs. Elm shook her head. That isn't how death works. Why not? You don't go to death. Death comes to you. Even death was something Nora couldn't do properly, it seemed. It was a familiar feeling. This feeling of being incomplete in just about every sense. An unfinished jigsaw of a human. Incomplete living and incomplete dying. So why am I not dead? Why has death not come to me? I gave it an open invitation. I'd wanted to die. But here I am, still existing. I am still aware of things. Well, if it's any comfort, you are very possibly about to die. People who pass by the library usually don't stay long, one way or the other. When she thought about it, and increasingly she had been thinking about it, Nora was only able to think of herself in terms of the things she wasn't, the things she hadn't been able to become, the regrets which were on permanent repeat in her mind. I haven't become an Olympic swimmer. I haven't become a glaciologist. I haven't become Dan's wife. I haven't become a mother. I haven't become the lead singer of The Labyrinths. I haven't managed to look after Voltaire. And now, last of all, she hadn't even managed to become dead. It was pathetic, really, the amount of possibilities she had squandered. While the Midnight Library stands, Nora, you will be preserved from death. Now, you have to decide how you want to live. Chapter 11. The Moving Shelves. The shelves on either side of Nora began to move. The shelves didn't change angles, they just kept on sliding horizontally. It was possible that the shelves weren't moving at all, but the books were, and it wasn't obvious why or even how. There was no visible mechanism making it happen, and no sound or sight of books falling off the end, rather, the start of the shelf. The books slid by at varying degrees of slowness, depending on the shelf they were on, but none moved fast. What's happening? Mrs. Elm's expression stiffened and her posture straightened, her chin retreated a little into her neck. She took a step closer to Nora and clasped her hands together. "It is time, my dear, to begin. If you don't mind me asking, begin what?" Every life contains many millions of decisions, some big, some small, but every time one decision is taken over another, the outcomes differ. An irreversible variation occurs, which in turn leads to further variations. These books are portals to all the lives you could be living. What? You have as many lives as you have possibilities. There are lives where you make different choices, and those choices lead to different outcomes. If you had done just one thing differently, you would have a different life story. And they all exist in the Midnight Library. They are all as real as this life. Parallel lives? Not always parallel. Some are more perpendicular. So, do you want to live a life you could be living? Do you want to do something differently? Is there anything you wish to change? Did you do anything wrong? That was an easy one. Yes, absolutely. Everything. The answer seemed to tickle the librarian's nose. Mrs. Elm quickly rummaged for the paper tissue that was stuffed up the inside sleeve of her polo neck. She brought it quickly to her face and sneezed into it. "Bless you." Nora watched as the tissue disappeared from the librarian's hands the moment she'd finished using it, through some strange and hygienic magic. "Don't worry. Tissues are like lives. They are always more." Mrs. Elm returned to her train of thought. Doing one thing differently is often the same as doing everything differently. Actions can't be reversed within a lifetime, however much we try. But you are no longer within a lifetime. You have popped outside. This is your opportunity, Nora, to see how things could be. This can't be real, Nora thought to herself. Oh, it is real, Nora Seed. But it is not quite reality as you understand it. For want of a better word, it is in between. It is not life, it is not death. It is not the real world in a conventional sense. But nor is it a dream. It isn't one thing or another. It is, in short, the Midnight Library. The slow-moving shelves came to a halt. Nora noticed that on one of the shelves, to her right, at shoulder height, there was a large gap. All the other areas of the shelves around her had the books tightly pressed side by side, but here, lying flat on the thin white shelf, there was only one book. And this book wasn't green like the others, it was gray. As gray as the stone of the front of the building when she had seen it through the mist. Mrs. Elm took the book from the shelf and handed it to Nora. She had a slight look of anticipatory pride, as if she'd handed her a Christmas present. It had seemed light when Mrs. Elm was holding it, but it was far heavier than it looked. Nora went to open it. Mrs. Elm shook her head. "You always have to wait for my say-so." "Why?" "Every book in here, every book in this entire library, except one, is a version of your life. This library is yours. It is here for you. You see, everyone's lives could have ended up an infinite number of ways. These books on the shelves are your life, all starting from the same point. In time. Right now. Midnight, Tuesday, the 28th of April. But these midnight possibilities aren't the same.
Some are similar, some are very different. This is crackers, Nora said. Except one. This one. Nora tilted the stone-gray book towards Mrs. Elm. Mrs. Elm raised an eyebrow. Yes, that one. It's something you have written without ever having to type a word. What? This book is the source of all your problems and the answer to them, too. But what is it? It is called, my dear, the Book of Regrets.
Chapter 12. The Book of Regrets. Nora stared at it. She could see it now, the small typeface embossed on the cover. The Book of Regrets. Every regret you have ever had since the day you were born is recorded in here, Mrs. Elm said, tapping her finger on the cover. I now give you permission to open it. As the book was so heavy, Nora sat down cross-legged on the stone floor to do so. She began to skim through it. The book was divided into chapters, chronologically arranged around the years of her life. 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 35. The chapters got much longer as the book progressed, year by year. But the regrets she accumulated weren't specifically related to that year in question. Regrets ignore chronology. They float around. The sequence of these lists changes all the time. Right. Yes, that makes sense, I suppose. She quickly realized they ranged from the minor and quotidian, I regret not doing any exercise today, to the substantial. I regret not telling my father I loved him before he died. There were continual background regrets, which repeated on multiple pages. I regret not staying in the labyrinths because I let down my brother. I regret not staying in the labyrinths because I let down myself. I regret not doing more for the environment. I regret the time I spent on social media. I regret not going to Australia with Izzy. I regret not having more fun when I was younger. I regret all those arguments with Dad. I regret not working with animals. I regret not doing geology at university instead of philosophy. I regret not learning how to be a happier person. I regret feeling so much guilt. I regret not sticking at Spanish. I regret not choosing science subjects in my A-levels. I regret not becoming a glaciologist. I regret not getting married. I regret not applying to do a master's degree in philosophy at Cambridge. I regret not keeping healthy. I regret moving to London. I regret not going to Paris to teach English. I regret not finishing the novel I started at university. I regret moving out of London. I regret having a job with no prospects. I regret not being a better sister. I regret not having a gap year after university. I regret disappointing my father. I regret that I teach piano more than I play it. I regret my financial mismanagement. I regret not living in the countryside. Some regrets were a little fainter than others. One regret shifted from practically invisible to bold and back again, as if it was flashing on and off, right there as she looked at it. The regret was, I regret not yet having children. That is a regret that sometimes is and sometimes isn't, explained Mrs. Elm, again somehow reading her mind. There are a few of those. From the age of 34 onwards, in a longest chapter at the end of the book, there were a lot of Dan-specific regrets. These were quite strong and bold, and played in her head like an ongoing fortissimo chord in a Haydn concerto. I regret being cruel to Dan. I regret breaking up with Dan. I regret not living in a country pub with Dan. As she stared down at the pages, she thought now of the man she had so nearly married. Chapter 13. Regret Overload. She'd met Dan while living with Izzy in Tooting. Big smile, short beard, visually a TV vet. Fun, curious. He drank quite a bit, but always seemed immune to hangovers. He had studied art history and put his in-depth knowledge of Rubens and Tintoretto to incredible use by becoming head of PR for a brand of protein flapjacks. He did, however, have a dream. And his dream was to run a pub in the countryside. A dream he wanted to share with her, with Nora. And she got carried away with his enthusiasm, got engaged. But suddenly she had realized she didn't want to marry him.
Deep down, she was scared of becoming her mother. She didn't want to replicate her parents' marriage. Still staring blankly at the book of regrets, she wondered if her parents had ever been in love, or if they had got married because marriage was something you did at the appropriate time with the nearest available person. A game where you grabbed the first person you could find when the music stopped. She had never wanted to play that game. Bertrand Russell wrote that to fear love is to fear life, and those who fear life are already 3 parts dead. Maybe that was her problem. Maybe she was just scared of living. But Bertrand Russell had more marriages and affairs than hot dinners, so perhaps he was no one to give advice. When her mom died, 3 months before the wedding, Nora's grief was immense. Though she had suggested that the date should be put back, it somehow never was. And Nora's grief fused with depression and anxiety and the feeling that her life was out of her own control. The wedding seemed such a symptom of this chaotic feeling that she felt tied to a train track, and the only way she could loosen the ropes and free herself was to pull out of the wedding. Though, in reality, staying in Bedford and being single and letting Izzy down about their Australia plans and starting work at String Theory and getting a cat had all felt like the opposite of freedom. "Oh no," said Mrs. Elm, breaking Nora's thoughts. "It's too much for you." And suddenly she was back feeling all this contrition, all that pain of letting people down and letting herself down. The pain she had tried to escape less than an hour ago. The regrets began to swarm together. In fact, while staring at the open pages of the book, the pain was actually worse than it had been wandering around Bedford. The power of all the regrets simultaneously emanating from the book was becoming agony. The weight of guilt and remorse and sorrow was too strong. She leaned back on her elbows, dropped the heavy book, and squeezed her eyes shut. She could hardly breathe, as if invisible hands were around her neck. "Make it stop!" "Close it now," instructed Mrs. Elm. "Close the book. Not just your eyes. Close it. You have to do it yourself." So Nora, feeling like she was about to pass out, sat back up and placed her hand under the front cover. It felt even heavier now, but she managed to close the book and gasped in relief.
Chapter 14. Every Life Begins Now. "Well," Mrs. Elm had her arms folded. Though she looked identical to the Mrs. Elm Nora had always known, her manner was definitely a little more brusque. It was Mrs. Elm, but also somehow not Mrs. Elm. It was quite confusing. "Well, what?" Nora said, still gasping, still relieved she could no longer feel the intensity of all her regrets simultaneously. "That was agony. I felt like I was about to be strangled. What is the point of this?" As Nora looked up, she noticed the lights for the first time. Just naked bulbs hanging down from wires attached to the ceiling, which seemed like a normal kind of light gray ceiling, except it was a ceiling that reached no walls. Like the floor here, it went on forever. The point is, there is a strong possibility that your old life is over. You wanted to die, and maybe you will. And you will need somewhere to go to, somewhere to land. Another life. So, you need to think hard. This library is called the Midnight Library because every new life on offer here begins now. And now is midnight. It begins now. All these futures. That's what is here. That's what your books represent. Every other immediate present and ongoing future you could have had. So there are no pasts in there? No, just the consequences of them. But those books are also written, and I know them all, but they are not for you to read. And when does each life end? It could be seconds or hours, or it could be days, months, more. If you have found a life you truly want to live, then you get to live it until you die of old age. If you really want to live a life hard enough, you don't have to worry. You will stay there as if you have always been there. Because in one universe, you have always been there. The book will never be returned, so to speak. It becomes less of a loan and more of a gift. The moment you decide you want that life, really want it, then everything that exists in your head now, including this midnight library, will eventually be a memory so vague and intangible it will hardly be there at all. One of the lights flickered overhead. The only danger, she continued, more ominously, is when you're here, between lives. If you lose the will to carry on, it will affect your root life, your original life, and that could lead to the destruction of this place. You'd be gone forever. You'd be dead. And so would your access to all this. That's what I want. I want to be dead. I would be dead because I want to be. That's why I took the overdose. I want to die. Well, maybe. Or maybe not. After all, you're still here. Nora tried to get her head around this. So, how do I return to the library if I'm stuck in a life even worse than the one I've just left? It can be subtle, but as soon as disappointment is felt in full, you'll come back here. Sometimes the feeling creeps up, other times it comes all at once. If it never arrives, you'll stay put, and you will be happy there by definition. It couldn't be simpler. So, pick something you would have done differently, and I will find you the book. That is to say, the life. Nora stared down at the book of regrets lying closed on the yellow-brown floor tiles. She remembered chatting late at night with Dan about his dream of owning a quaint little pub in the country. His enthusiasm had been infectious, and it had almost become her dream, too. I wish I hadn't left Dan, and that I was still in a relationship with him. I regret us not staying together and working towards that dream. Is there a life where we are still together? Of course, said Mrs. Elm. The books in the library began to move again, as though the shelves were conveyor belts. This time, though, instead of going as slow as a wedding march, they moved faster and faster and faster, until they couldn't really be seen as individual books at all. They just whirred by in streams of green. Then, just as suddenly, they stopped. Mrs. Elm crouched down and took a book from the lowest shelf to her left. The book was one of the darker shades of green. She handed it to Nora. It was a lot lighter than the Book of Regrets, even though it was a similar size. Again, there was no title on the spine, but a small one embossed on the front, precisely the same shade as the rest of the book. It said, My Life. But it's not my life. Oh, Nora, they are all your lives. What do I do now? You open the book and turn to the first page. Nora did so. Okay, said Mrs. Elm with careful precision. Now, read the first line. Nora stared down and read, She walked out of the pub into the cool night air. And Nora had just enough time to think to herself, Pub? After that, it was happening. The text began to swirl and soon became indecipherable in fast motion, as she felt herself weaken. She never knowingly let go of the book, but there was a moment where she was no longer a person reading it, and a consequent moment where there was no book or library at all.
Chapter 15. The Three Horseshoes. Nora was standing outside in crisp, clean air, but unlike in Bedford, it wasn't raining here. Where am I? She whispered to herself. There was a small row of quaint stone terraced houses on the other side of the gently curving road. Quiet, old houses, with all their lights off, nestled at the edge of a village before fading into the stillness of the countryside. A clear sky, an expanse of dotted stars, a waning crescent moon, the smell of fields, the two-way twit-twoo of tawny owls, and then quiet again. A quiet that had a presence, that was a force in the air. Weird. She had been in Bedford, then in that strange library, and now she was here, on a pretty village road, without hardly even moving. On this side of the road, golden light filtered out of a downstairs window. She looked up and saw an elegantly painted pub sign creaking softly in the wind. Overlapping horseshoes underneath carefully italicized words. The Three Horseshoes. In front of her, there was a chalkboard standing on the pavement. She recognized her own handwriting, at its neatest. The 3 horseshoes. Tuesday night, quiz night. 8:30 p.m. True knowledge exists in knowing that you know nothing. Socrates, after losing our quiz.
Chapter 16, the penultimate update Nora had posted before she found herself between life and death. Do you ever think, how did I end up here? Like you are in a maze and totally lost and it's all your fault because you were the one who made every turn? And you know that there are many routes that could have helped you out because you hear all the people on the outside of the maze who made it through and they are laughing and smiling. And sometimes you get a glimpse of them through the leaves, a fleeting shape through the leaves. And they seem so damn happy to have made it, and you don't resent them, but you do resent yourself for not having their ability to work it all out, do you? Or is this maze just for me? P.S. My cat died.